The Journeyman Chapter 6. That night, instead of being the first of a cold spell, was the first of a long succession of such nights. When the weather showed no sign of moderating, a way of life was made to adapt to it. Before the week was out, the Dunkley family were all sleeping in the long room, and Jared and John were taking watches between them through the night to keep the fire and have an eye on the barn. The animals were moved into even closer quarters so that the heat they threw off might be more confined. Jared worked during the daytime to finish the parlor walls of the Dunkley house, for with his sketches for the Christie house nearing completion, he was eager to start on it. There was little warmth in the square room, but Jared seemed to feel the cold less than most people. Only when his brushes stiffened and his paint hardened so they could not flow would he seek the fire in the kitchen. It had burned so long that the bricks were warm as sun-baked granite in a summer field, and Jared, lying his hands on them, felt heat flow into the fingers that had become almost as stiff as his bristles. "It's the longest cold spell I've ever seen," John Dunkley said, as January drew to its close, and there had been no let-up in the weather. Only on days when snow came blowing on the wind, piling up more inches on the 5 feet that already blanketed the country, did the cold mitigate a little. Then the next day it would come on again, steelier than ever, with muffled quietness, except for the creaking of the trees and the whispering sound of hard snow contracting it. In the house there would be a snap of a board splitting or a nail cracking, then silence. There was another sound, and it was one that cut to the heart, the pitiful lowing from the barn of creatures that could not be warm. So they took to bringing the cows and sheep into the house for brief periods. Oh, it sounds cold. Down the village way this past month, there's more than one farmer has lost his newborn calves from the cold, Dunkley said. "My brown cow is ready to calf, and I can't afford to lose her or the young one either." Worry plowed a furrow across his brow. "I've helped many a calf into the world on my father's farm," Jared said. "We'll bring the brown cow through." "It must have been the Lord that sent you here this winter," Dunkley exclaimed. "For what I'd be doing alone in all this cold, I don't know. What with the children so small and Eliza not fit right now for much hard work." So she is pregnant. Jared smiled. No flames on the hearth ever sent such a rush of warmth through his body as did the words of appreciation. "You've not got over much flesh on you," Dunkley went on, "but you don't seem to feel the cold like most folks. 'Tis beyond me the way you work in that parlor till your paints are ice, the way you milk in the barn when the milk has all but frozen in your pail, and when you sleep or what you eat, I don't know. But I'm glad to have you here." He took up his pail that had been warming by the fire and went out to do the milking. Jared went on with his work, singing quietly to himself for pleasure at the room that had come into its perfect bloom. Only small finishing touches remained to be done here and there. It was a warm room with spruce yellow walls that kept their cheer even against the stark white country that peered in at each of the 4 windows. His colors were the red of bricks and the green of marsh rushes. The willow design that he had made was graceful. Interspersed were small, intricately developed medallions that followed no set pattern. Yes, it was beautiful, the best yet that he had done. He smiled to himself as he heard Mr. Toppin saying, "That's not to say I can't do a better." And that better for Jared would be the house Corbin Christie was making for his bride. The door opened and shut quickly, and feet moved hastily across the room and toward the parlor. "Jared!" Eliza Dunkley was standing in the doorway. He turned quickly. Her large cape was wrapped tightly about her, but under it she was shivering. Her face was pale, as if all color had been driven from it by the icy wind, and her eyes were wild and frightened. Jared had seen the eyes of a deer look like that when driven by hunters out of the woods. "Eliza, what is it?" Jared crossed quickly toward her and taking her hands, led her to the fire and made her sit down on the settle. "'Tis cold enough to freeze the marrow in your bones," she said, her teeth chattering against the words. Jared rubbed her hands in his, for the cold had drained the heat from her body like a fluid, and there was little vitality left to catch the warmth from the fire. It was not the cold alone that made her numb and chilled. It was something worse. It was fear. Jared saw in her eyes the look of one who had fled fear, but had been overtaken by its stealthy stalking. "Oh, Jared," the words came in a rush, then were choked, then came hastily again. "I've been down in the valley, at the Prestons. Nancy had her babe this morning, but she couldn't give it life. They said she was so cold, Jared. No matter how much wood the men put on the fire, they couldn't get the room warm." The shaking of Eliza's body and the clicking of her teeth drowned the rest of her words. Jared kept rubbing her hands together between his own until the shivering lessened. Eliza's head, which she had held tensely against the settle, bent forward. Her eyes, which had been glazed with fright, swam in a mist of sadness. "Poor mite of a babe," she said in a softer tone. "I'm afeard mine will come that way if the weather doesn't change." "No, Eliza," Jared spoke quickly, and so sharply that Eliza held her head straight and was riveted by his tone. "No, never say that again. Never think that again. Your babe will have a warm welcome. Something that's more than fire on a hearth or boiling water in a kettle. Haven't we made the room ready? Aren't we all waiting with hearts as eager as birds for the dawn? Now you rest a while." Eliza leaned back and closed her eyes. The wisp of a smile moved across her lips. "I'm so tired, Jared. It was hard coming up the hill from the valley. The wind pierced me through, but here there's warmth. I'm not afraid now, nor will I be when the time comes." One by one, each in his own way, all the family turned to Jared during the terrible days of the Arctic winter, whose grip over the land seemed so relentless, for there was warmth in his presence and strength in his words. A few nights later, when the brown cow began her piteous mooing, Jared was asleep. John Dunkley, watching by the fire, went out to the barn to attend her. There was no sleep for the other animals that night, and no contented chewing of cud or munching of hay. Sheep, oxen, cows, horses, and fowl stared into the dank darkness, so barely shattered by the light from Dunkley's tin lantern, when the brown cow gave birth to a stillborn heifer.
Is it dead?
That means it was born dead. Dunkley sighed. Up and down the country, the farmers were losing their young stock during the bitter winter, and though it might put veal on the pantry shelves for a good time to come, it made the herd that much smaller. Veal is meat from a baby cow. There were not enough cows anywhere these days for a farmer to stand the loss of a single one. Dunkley looked down at the limp, wet burden that the mother was licking. Her rough tongue was going over and over the fur with its pretty markings, in a frenzied gesture impelled by instinct. What does that mean?
Not really.
Her instinct was to lick it and to rough it up, to get it to kind of liven up. She doesn't realize that it's dead, but her instinct is telling her to keep licking it. Yet the old cow seemed to know as well as John Dunkley that the calf was dead. Turning away, Dunkley took his lantern from a peg and went toward the house, thinking he might as well leave the calf with its mother until morning, as the cow would be readier for a parting then. He felt his heart heavy, and his step matched it. Strange what there was about sorrow, he thought, that made a man feel old and very tired. He pulled off his boots in the kitchen, then went to Jared's cot and laid his hand on the thin shoulder. It was the time agreed on to change their watch. Jared woke easily. "Is all well?" he asked. "The calf's come," Dunkley answered, "but it's as dead as all the others around this countryside." He sighed and went over to his bed. Jared pulled his boots on quickly and drew a coat over his heavy shirt. He looked to the fire and swung the crane with its kettle of water over the heat, then went out to the barn. The mother cow had ceased the frenzy of her licking and was drawing her tongue slowly over the calf. Jared went to her, talking softly all the time, and stroking between her curled horns. He gave her a measure of meal and, as she bent her nose to it, picked up the calf to bring it into the house. The cow made a quick move to follow him. Barred by her pen, she lowed a feeble farewell. Jared laid the stiff creature on the warm bricks of the hearth, moving quickly and silently as a shadow in the room and its 5 sleeping people. He warmed cloths on the kettle of hot water and wrapped the calf in them. He fanned the fire to a greater warmth and set a small pan of milk to heat. Then he took the calf in his arms. He was only doing what Mother Thaxter had said she had done for him when she had been called to take him away from beside the cold body of his mother. There wasn't much life in you, little Jared, she had told him, but there was somewhat, and I had to make that somewhat feel it was wanted in the world. So I loved you as I loved my own, and I held you as close to my heart as I had ever held any of my own. And I prayed God that we might keep you with us, for I knew we needed you. Jared could not remember having thought of those words since he was a little boy. But they came clearly to him now as he lay by the fire, pressing the calf close to his body, in a voice so low it would have woken none of the sleepers. He talked to the calf. He prayed too, using words he had learned from Mother Thaxter, who had first taught him about God and the faith that he had gained from Mr. Toppin. The night wore on. Wind whistled about the house, and snow driven before it stung at the windows. Cold crept over the floor, but there was a wide circle of warmth around the hearth into which no cold could enter. Just beyond the circle, just beyond the light of the fire with its softly moving shadows, slept the Dunkley children in their trundle bed, and in the great bed, John Dunkley, his face lined with weariness, and Eliza, her face sweet with peace. A dread of light came weaving into the room, a shred of light. The black beyond the windows began to thin to gray. Jared dipped a wooden spoon in the milk that stood warm and ready near the ashes, and, pouring it into his palm, cupped his hand to the calf's mouth. There was the slightest flickering of the calf's tail, so slight that it was almost none at all, like a breeze on a still summer day that is so quickly swallowed up in the stillness that it seems never to have been. Then the tail flickered again, and the nose pressed itself into Jared's palm. A faint, sucking sound could be heard in the quietness of the room. Moments passed, moments that held the bliss of hours. Now there was no more milk in the pan by the ashes. A pile of damp cloths were moist on the bricks. A small, imperious mooing came from the young calf, trying to stand on unsteady legs, flicking its curl-tipped tail, while a deeper mooing echoed from the barn. John Dunkley sat up in bed with a start. The small sound had wakened the other sleepers too, with a sight to take the chill from the coldest morning. There was Jared Austen, sitting cross-legged by the hearth, a smile as bright as a full moon on his face, and beside him was a 5-hour-old heifer. Tobit jumped up and down in the trundle bed for joy at the new living thing that had not been there when he went to bed. So the brown cow's got her calf, Eliza said sensibly, then started to prepare the children for the day. John Dunkley, sitting there on the edge of the bed, rubbed his eyes as if he could not believe what they saw. Jared lifted the calf in his strong arms. I'd best take the young one to the mother. She knows what's good for it, he said. He left the room for the barn. As the weeks went on, the nights remained cold, while the sun, rising higher, brought some moderation to the days. The people and animals began to accustom themselves more and more to the weather. Since the cold had to all appearances settled on them for the rest of the winter, The only thing to do was to get used to it. They were well into February now. The sun was strong. The days were lengthening, and with March, there was bound to be thawing. The turn of the year was at hand when winter merged into spring. The struggle with the cold would soon have an end, and the struggle with the soil would soon have a beginning. What do you think that means? The struggle with the soil.
The hardness of getting things planted.
Yeah, having to plow and probably still the soil being really cold. Now that spring was in sight, people could talk about the winter more readily, comparing experiences and relating adventures and commencing to tell tales which would be retold in chimney corners for years to come. Some of the old-timers whose memories reached far to the past even presumed to say that this winter did not compare to the so-called Canada winter of 1780, when for 40 days there was neither rain nor thaw. One old man who had been a boy 20 years before that winter recalled the year of 1762, when snow lay 6 feet deep in all the woods, and the temperature was many degrees below zero for weeks at a time. There had been hard winters before in New England, and there would be hard winters again. But now that one more had been grappled with, there was not a family in the country that could not feel stronger for it, no matter what their losses had been. Jared had finished his work in the Dunkley house. Now, early every morning, he trampled the mile up the hill to Corbin Christie's. The hard-packed snow crunched underfoot. The wind whisked about him, and the sun, sparkling on the white world, studded it as with myriad diamonds. Near evening, when the light began to fail, Jared would leave his paints and brushes and tramp down the hill again to the cheer and friendliness of the Dunkley household, which was his accepted home. He had never been so happy in a task as he was in Corbin Christie's. Indeed, his happiness grew and expanded with every task until he wondered how he could contain it. Mr. Toppin had said that he must put himself into his work for the work to be lasting. And never had it seemed so easy for Jared to bring heart, body, and mind to bear on a task as it was in Corbin Christie's house. Jared was used to doing what people wanted. Here, where he had free scope, he was supplying ideas which, because they were so satisfying, seemed to be Christie's own. In the early evenings by the fire, when John Dunkley might be stitching shoes for children or hammering out some needed wooden implement for the house, and Eliza's fingers were tirelessly busy with sewing or knitting, they would ask Jared about his work, but Jared could never tell them much. Until it was complete in his mind, and thus complete on the bare walls, he could be coaxed to say only a little. "Did the work go well today?" Eliza would ask, glancing up from the woolens on her lap. "Yes, it did go well," Jared would answer, looking dreamily at her and seeing the walls he was doing instead of the person he was addressing. "You're wearing a smile these days, the way you wear your jerkin, if it's ever off you." You're wearing a smile these days the way you wear your jerkin. It's never off you," Eliza went on. "I like the work," Jared replied. "I like to think of the last Corbin will bring there, come June. But you shall see the walls too, Eliza," he promised. She smiled. Nothing could be more beautiful than the walls Jared had done for her, but she looked forward to seeing the walls he was doing for her neighbor. "Someday soon, Jared," she said, "you'll be readying a home for a lass of your own." Jared's eyes lost their dreamy gaze. "Someday I shall, and the day may not be so far off either." "You have a lass in mind?" Jared nodded, and his eyes were bright with happiness, soft with memory. "Who is she, Jared?" "Her father farms on the far side of yonder mountain. We were brother and sister together all our early years, and ever since I can remember I've loved her. I haven't seen her since I went off with Mr. Toppin." "Why don't you go see her, Jared, since she lives not a day's journey off?" Jared hesitated. Then, with a curious gesture, he held out 2 hands before him. Supple hands they were, and strong, with fine, long fingers, knowing hands. She's one that wants something fine from life. I've naught to give her but what my hands can do. When they have worked well for me, I'll take the fruits to her. Eliza put her sewing down and leaned forward toward Jared. Go see her soon, Jared. A girl looks early for a husband in this country. Don't trust to waiting long. Jared turned toward the fire. He could not tell Eliza all. He could not even say that when the time was right, when he felt within his heart brave enough to face his father, he would go for Jeanette. Jeanette, even as a little girl, he knew best and remembered well, so strong, so self-reliant, so full of courage that he knew he could not go claim her until his heart was wholly free from fear. Then he would be all of a man in his own right. The days moved on towards spring, and Jared worked in the empty house, for Corbin spent most of his time in the barn with the stock or in the woods felling trees and clearing brush for wider pastures. Jared kept a fire on the hearth of the room, that would be at the parlor, and near it kept his paints and the brushes he was not using. To it he came to loosen his fingers when they became so stiff from the cold that they were no longer obedient to his mind. So happy, so interested was he in the work, that he hardly sensed the cold around the room around the walls of the room, until hands and feet, making their demands, made him conscious that such a thing as cold had to be reckoned with. In the small entryway of the house, Jared hung a frieze of bells, but such bells as had never been hung before, delicate and light with dainty swags and tassels. Wedding bells, Liberty bells, church bells they were, all in one with their promise, their freedom, and their comfort. That was the upper frieze. Above the wainscot was the pineapple, true to the countryside's tradition of hospitality. There where the eye of a caller would first see it. Then there were lesser and indeterminate designs framing the doors into the 2 rooms and color laid on them with all with skill and judgment. The walls pleased Jared as he surveyed them. They spoke of welcome and cheer. They had been difficult to do, for there was warmth of neither sun nor fire in the entryway, and wind had hurled itself against the door and found countless unseen ways of penetration. That means the snow was getting through, the wind and the cold and the snow, getting through the door even. Jared had been glad then that he was thin, for there was less of him to counter the cold, but always his joy in his work was like a warm mantle around him, though it did not keep his paints from freezing. When Jared finally brought Corbin Christie to see the entryway, the big man, standing there, looking twice as big, so muffled up in woolens he was, let out a long, low exclamation of satisfaction. "It's fit for a royal palace," he said, and admiration turned a wide smile across his face. "I don't know where such a skill comes from, Jared Austin. It's uncanny, but I'm glad you've got it. Why, if I speak above a whisper, those bells will start ringing." Jared smiled. They're meant to do just that when you bring your bride across the threshold, and never cease all the days you spend together here. Corbin nodded. "I've a good mind to fetch the lass to see the job." "No, Corbin," Jared said quickly, and because he knew there was no way to stop Corbin Christie's mind once it was set on something, he added, "Not until the other room is done, too." "When will that be?" Jared thought ahead to the work to be done. "By mid-April, I'll have it finished." He smiled and added more cautiously, "I think I'll have it done. And I generally do what I think I'll do." "Mayhap I'll wait till then," Corbin said doubtfully. It's bitter weather now to bring a lass on a long journey to see a few painted walls in a cold, bare house. She's strong. She won't mind the cold. She's as strong as a young ox." "Of course she is," Jared said. "Any woman to be fit for you, Corbin, would have to be strong and brave. And there's something about women. Strong as they are, they like to be the objects of a little tender care. Life is hard enough for them. It's a good thing not to make it any harder." Corbin nodded. "That's sound enough, Jared Austen. And if I wait till April to fetch her, on a day when the sun is high and the birds are singing, it'll be better. I've plenty to do before then. Why, I've been kept so busy with tending the stock all winter that I've barely begun to build the furniture yet." I'll give a hand to you on that when you're ready," Jared said. Corbin laid his hand on Jared's shoulder in a clumsy gesture of appreciation. "Money can't pay you, Jared Austen, for the work you do when you come to a house." "Maybe it can't," Jared said, smiled shyly up at the man towering above him, "but money in your pocket is a fine thing all the same." When March wore into April, Jared left the Dunkleys and moved his few possessions up to the Corbin Christies so that he would have every available hour of daylight for his work. The gray one neighed cheerfully as she was given a stall in the barn, and young Meteor, Christie's powerful stallion, neighed in response. The spring sun coming into the parlor in which Jared was at work was high and strong, and it did more to warm the whole room than the fire on the hearth did. Jared's heart beat fast with joy as he placed his stencils on the walls, stencils of flowers just picked from the garden, quick with life, fragrant and beautiful. And because summer's wealth had been remembered in the white grip of such a winter as no one had known before, the flowers were fashioned with all the loving tenderness that memory could bestow. Over the fireplace, Jared laid his most daring design, 2 lovebirds, holding from their beak a looped cord, and on the cord 2 hearts become one. It was the culmination of all his desire, of all his imagining of what a bride's house should contain. Traditional as it was to entwine red hearts somewhere in the decoration, he wanted to take only the semblance of tradition and bring it to the very perfection of feeling in this house, where 2 lives would soon be united, where 2 hearts, with all their mingled longings, must become one for their own good and the good of those who would come after. This, then, was the best he could do and had ever done. Jared knew it as he looked at the finished walls. When he laid his tools down and crossed the room to sit on the little stool and survey his work, he wondered, quite apart from his usual crescendo of confidence, whether he could ever do another such task. He sighed. He was tired and somehow felt drained with all thoughts and ideas. He would like to go and lie on a hillside and let the rain wash him clean like the sun dry him and the stars shed their light on him. He would like to be quiet for a long time, perhaps for a whole day, from dawning to dawning, perhaps for a month of such days. Only then would he feel life stir within him again, ideas and the need to express them, pricking him to activity. But now, all he could think of, all he could desire, was quiet. He looked over at the brushes and stencils lying on the floor, at the paint pots with color dripping down their sides, and he wondered who would pick them up and put them away. For he felt without the strength to do it just then. He put his head in his hands. It was heavy, and his hands were rough and cold. It must be at such times, he thought, that a man looks to a woman. The touch of her hands would instill life again, for her whole being was so quick to give life. Corbin Christie could be heard coming in from the barn, shaking the wet snow from his boots, crossing the kitchen, opening the door through the parlor. Standing on the threshold, he breathed deeply as he saw the finished room. The walls with their designs that were as gracious and free as swallows in flight. They were Christie's walls now, for they had gone from Jared Austen through stencil and brush and had become his by right of purchase. Christie sighed from a depth of wonder and delight. Then he turned and saw Jared, a small bent-over figure like a reed broken in two. "Man, are you ill?" Christie exclaimed. anxiety almost overruled by inadequacy, for if Jared were, he knew not what he could do. Jared shook his head, and his whole body moved with motion. "Just tired," he murmured. Corbin walked around the room, examining each detail in that perfection of design and execution which Jared had developed under Mr. Toppin. Nowhere was there a line that had wavered. Nowhere was there a brushstroke other than true. "I'll fetch the last tomorrow," Christie said, and Jared nodded, though the words had little meaning to him. After Corbin left the room and twilight had deepened into night, Jared rose from the stool and picked up his stencils. There were still coals in the ash on the hearth, and one by one, stiff, paint-covered papers were laid on them. The paper smoldered for a while, then burst into flame, and the flickering light illuminated the stencils on the wall as the stencils themselves went down to ashes. Jared slept that night as he had not slept, as long as he could remember. When he awoke, Christie was not there, and in the barn the stall was empty where young Meteor stood. There were tracks of a horse traveling swiftly in the softening ice and mud of the road. The day was bright with sunshine, and the cold April wind was thinly clad with warmth. Jared cleaned his brushes, capped his paint pots, and set them in orderliness. He swept the rooms, leaving all in readiness for Corbin and the lass. He did his chores with the numbness of one who could summon the habit of strength without its will. Then he left the house and started across the meadows, still lying deep in snow. Once he was in the woods, the land rose steeply, and Jared began to breathe deeply as the cold air circled about him, and the sun rested a warm hand on his back. A half-mile back in the woods was the crest of a small hill and a clearing. The snow had melted and run off from the clearing, and the earth was damp and brown with a tinge of green fire running through the ground covering. Here was life, and growth reaching out for the summer's warmth. And here was rest for Jared, not the rest of sleep, but the rest that soothed his mind, laying it fallow for a season. He stretched his lean body out on a fallen pine and lay looking up at the sky. He dreamed then with wide-open eyes and a smile on his face. What was his work if it did not grow better, clearer, nobler with each task, even as he prayed to grow each day? "Yes, I've done good work, and I shall do even better when I take up my brush," he said aloud to the high blue vault above him. He said it over and over, shouting the words, whispering them, gaining vigor with each utterance. The sun had climbed to midday, and because Jared was ready to face the world again, he got up from the fallen tree and started down the hill through the woods. The slope of the land and the new thoughts coursing through him gave speed to his feet. Even through the deep-lying snow with its icy crust, reaching from the edge of the woods, he paused at the sound of voices, deep laughter entwined with high coming up the road. It was Corbin with his lass, riding pillion behind him. Young Meteor, for all his strength, was plodding heavily through the mud, his sides steaming from the hard work, and long winter coat still unshed. They made a fair picture, and as they drew nearer, Jared smiled for delight at them. The stallion was a handsome creature, carrying himself so loftily with a long switch tail that streamed out bravely in the wind, and Corbin sat him with the ease of one who has perfect understanding with animals. His head was high, his broad shoulders were squared, like those of a knight of old who would fight in tourney for his lady and win for the love he bore her. As they approached the barn, they would leave young Meteor. Jared saw what a match for Corbin the lass was, for she was a sturdy, well-set-up girl, as young and fresh as morning dew, with arms strong for work in house or field. She wore a blue dress under her coat, and her thick brown hair hung loose and wind-blown on her shoulders. "Janet Baxter!" Jared cried aloud, and with joy in his heart he began to run from the woods toward her. Then a wall rose up before him and stopped him, a wall of realization. This was not the Jeanette he knew, lovely and memorable and possessed through the years, but the Jeanette who was to be Corbin Christie's bride come June. With a feeling of numbness around his heart, Jared moved back to the shelter of a tree, pressing himself against the roughly fissured bark of a maple big enough to hide him. "Oh, Jeanette," he cried aloud in the strange, listening silence of the woods. Twice during the time the two were in the house, Christie came to the door and called loudly for Jared. The third time, Jeanette lifted her voice after his, lute-like and clear, calling the name she had so often called in her childhood, but Jared, nailed to the tree by an anguish he was trying to find a way to bear, made no answer. They were approaching the barn, and their voices came sharply on the wind. "He was tired last night when he finished," Corbin was saying. "Like as not, he's gone to the woods for a spell of rest." "Couldn't we go and find him?" Jeanette was asking, and it was still the voice of a little girl who was used to making her way alone. "No, lass," Corbin answered gently. "I promised your mother to have you home by nightfall, and if we go floundering through the snow in the woods, who knows when we'll get back." They were on young Meteor now, down the road, down the hill, moving slowly through the mud, moving with the quick clop of willing hoofs where the road was hard. The sun was drawing shadowy lines over the snow. The wind had no longer even an edge of warmth. The mud in the road was freezing. The pools of water left by the sun were being sheeted with ice. Then a small, frightened voice came crying out of the gathering twilight. "Jared! Jared!" Jared lifted his face from the rough press of the maple's bark and listened. He peered out from around the tree trunk. "Jared, where are you?" It was Tobit, splattered with mud, breathless from the long run uphill. Jared ran quickly across the field. He was beside the boy, folding him in his arms. The fright on Tobit's face melted into tears of relief at finding Jared, and for a moment he could say nothing but gulp his sorrow and gasp for breath. "Mama's took bad," he sobbed. "No one is home. Papa and the others went to market 2 days ago. I came for you." "Oh!" Jared picked Tobit in his arms and ran with him to the barn. A few motions, and the gray ones had a bridle flung over her head and a blanket tossed over her back. Jared led her outdoors and mounted lightly, then drew Tobit up in front of him. They were hurrying down the road, through mud and ice, into the fast-falling night.